Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Well, it's unusually warm and smoky for this time of year in my neck of the woods, and that's partly due to the fact that the drought-ridden West Coast is burning down once again. Guys, this is the age of extremes. You need to prepare for what is coming. I believe we're at Defcon 2, and I'm going to lay out all the reasons why. Let's go over all of the World War III data points for the last 24 hours. So what do we have? The situation is such that NATO is currently engaged in one of the biggest wars with the Russians since World War II on the European continent, and it's about to get a lot bloodier because Russia has just declared martial law in the 4 newly annexed territories. They're doing this because of what's happening in this town called Kherson. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute, but do not let the Russian media minimize this. This imposition of martial law in this heightened state of readiness extends to the entire country of Russia as a whole, from Moscow all the way to Siberia. They are putting their entire country on a war footing. This is just the beginning. This is full-scale mobilization. Mark my words, whenever they say something, you need to bring it up one order of magnitude to get the truth. That is absolutely what is happening. They're preparing their population, or in the beginnings of preparing their population, for a potential nuclear escalation. We have the UK and USA having emergency discussions about what might be a nuclear escalation as a result of the Kherson quagmire. Now, Ben Wallace flew to go and visit Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon. Usually something like that only happens in such an emergent fashion if there is something really serious going on behind the scenes and if they have some sort of intel about what is coming. We have simultaneous nuclear exercises, both planned by the Russians and NATO, so it's not out of the ordinary to see this happen, but in the current climate of heightened tensions, it is unusual that both of these would be undertaken because, of course, there is a risk that either side will misinterpret these actions as an actual attack, and then we might potentially see an accidental nuclear incident. But yes, you have nuclear war games being waged by both NATO and Russia at the same time, simulating full-scale nuclear war with one another in the current war environment. It's just absolutely nuts. We have the interception of Russian nuclear bombers. Near Alaska, we have one of the biggest nuclear submarines, the Belgorod, out to sea that has the capability to wipe most western coastal cities completely off the map just by itself. Okay, we have Russian diplomats being pulled from Western nations. The Russians are saying, we're done with you idiots. There's no point in talking. There's obviously not any negotiation that's going to happen. And remember, one of the major precursors to a major conflict is the suspension of diplomacy and communication between countries. Guys, this is a really, really bad sign. This is a telltale indicator that something big is coming. You basically have the Baltic states who have stopped short of declaring all-out war on Russia, but they might as well because they've now deemed them state sponsors of terrorism. Recall that the reason why Biden hasn't done this is because he knows what it entails. It basically puts the U.S. at war with Russia. We have Poland, Belarus, Switzerland, all openly preparing and refurbishing and taking inventory of their bunkers for what may well be a nuclear conflagration. We have governments around the world encouraging their populations, or in some cases buying them for their populations, radiation medication like iodine pills. We have public awareness campaigns ramping up in the United States, trying to prepare the population for CBRN incidents. That's chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear events. We have the government stockpiling acute radiation sickness medication for the purpose of strategic nuclear war. We have China, who's engaged in this ongoing and escalating economic war with the USA, the chip war, which is escalating to the point where we may well not see smartphones, computers, even cars, new cars being shipped from China in the years ahead. If quite frankly, if the human race makes it that far at the current rate we're on, because we're reaching critical levels with this stuff. We have NATO, who's attempting to undermine the Iranian regime and potentially destabilizing that region. Now, if that happens, that's going to send oil prices to the moon, baby. I guarantee it. The nuclear deal has all but collapsed. And of course, Iran has committed hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles to the Russians. Now, some people are saying, oh, the Russians must be running out of ammo. But people who actually know things understand that the Russians have a lot of ammo left to bring to bear. The reason why they're buying this stuff from the Iranians is they are saving the good stuff for the coming war with NATO. Now, if NATO disintegrates, if these riots and these protests in France, in Germany, and if the UK governments continue to fall, which it looks like another one might, you may well see the disintegration of NATO. Then you have Poland and all the Baltic states who are going to be sitting ducks for the Russian Federation, which will now be that much stronger because they have fully committed now, I believe, to taking over the entire country. They've realized that they have to do all of Ukraine. That's why they're mobilizing in Belarus. That's why the declaration of martial law. That's why the full-scale mobilization of their military. It's all happening. Guys, prepare for World War III. Japan is preparing for war. Saudi Arabia, breakdown of communications with the United States. You have the United States now saying they're going to take even more oil out of this strategic oil reserve to try to offset some of the OPEC cuts. We have South Korea going so far as to conscript members of the boy band BTS. Yes, they're going to be drafted into military service for 2 years. I'm thinking this is somewhat of a gimmick to try to make the militarization of South Korea again fashionable to the youth there, because the North Koreans are relentlessly firing artillery into the exclusion zone as a warning sign to South Korea's military exercises. They are constantly telegraphing their nuclear ambitions and doing nuclear tests. Guys, this situation is getting absolutely out of control. Recall a few months ago, the UK distributed its Air Force assets throughout the country because they didn't want to have a concentration of force to entice the Russians if the Russians were to do some sort of nuclear first strike. The situation is getting hot, but we're told by the government, by the Air Force General, that they're ready and there's nothing to worry about. We're at Defcon 5. Just go back to sleep. So we have wars potentially in the South China Sea between China and Taiwan, wars erupting on the Korean Peninsula. We potentially are looking at a destabilized Middle East. And we have, quite possibly, if Kherson is lost by the Russians, my friends, we can count the days until some sort of nuclear incident occurs, I suspect. So, yeah, I mean, that's the gist of what you need to know. Now let's go over what this martial law order entails, because if this war spreads, you can expect this, perhaps a diluted version of it, at home. Enforced maintenance of law and order. Boosted protection of various infrastructural objects, meaning they might have to put, missile defense batteries in certain places. Temporary resettlement of residents to safe areas, evacuation of infrastructure objects of economic, social, and cultural significance. So it's time to get your go bags and go. GTFO, essentially, is what the regime is saying. A special regime of entry and exit from the territory where the regime of martial law is established. Now, Russia is saying they're not closing their borders yet. Now, throughout the progression of this war, whenever Russia says it's not going to do something yet, you can pretty much set your watch to it. That train is coming in at least a few weeks, if not a few days. Suspension of activities of political parties, prohibition of rallies and other mass public events and strikes. Participation of citizens in work targeting the needs of defense, liquidation, and destruction. Seizure of property with subsequent reimbursement by the state of its value. I wonder, that's very ambiguous, isn't it? See, in Canada, when they do that, they're just going to, they're just going to come and take all the guns, and they're going to give you whatever they claim something is worth. But of course, at that time, money may well be worthless. I'm sorry, I'm being a little over dramatic. Maybe not dramatic enough for some. Participation of citizens, participation, that's a nice word, of citizens in work targeting the needs of defense, liquidation, or destruction. That means they're going to conscript people to do jobs. We're talking about labor camps. In fact, they even go on to say internment, isolation of citizens of a foreign state at war with the Russian Federation in accordance with the general recognized principles of norms in international law. The seizure of property with subsequent reimbursement by the state. I already read that one. I apologize, guys. I've had a lot on my mind for the last few days. Prohibition of violation of curfew by citizens, whether in the streets or in other public places. Checking of documents and inspection of vehicles. What that amounts to is stop and frisk on steroids with no repercussions. Prohibitions of arms sales, here we go, weapons, ammunition, explosives, and poisonous substances, the establishment of a special regime for the circulation of medicines and preparations containing narcotic and or other potent substances and alcoholic beverages. So they're coming for whatever guns might remain. Introduction of military censorship of postal items and messages transmitted using telecommunication systems, as well as control over telephone conversations. Now, you should know this is all stuff that has been in place in Ukraine since the start of this conflict. In Ukraine, you cannot leave. You have to go and serve in the military. Now, according to Russian media, again, this is the Russians, don't shoot the messenger. They're saying that a lot of Ukrainians are being forced to fight on the front line. And if they don't, well, there's some pretty harsh punishments. Some of these punishments might involve a bullet. Now, I'm not saying that that's what's happening. I'm just saying that's what the Russian side is saying. And when we're looking at trying to get an accurate understanding of what is going on the ground, it's important to take the Western view and the Russian view and find the midpoint. And that's where you're going to find the most amount of truth. Introduction of military command in organizations and public authorities. Elections on territory where martial law is enforced cannot be held. Now, this is an interesting story, guys. This tells you that things might not be going so well for NATO. Staff at British nuclear warhead facility are going to be voting on industrial action. Yes, Britain's atomic weapons establishment, which develops and maintains the nation's nuclear warheads, may go on strike. Now, I don't know what your definition of essential service is, but in times where we're at such a high Defcon level, I think we're at Defcon 2, I'm pretty sure this is an essential service. So it's kind of funny, it's kind of tragic at the same time that the resulting economic consequences of the war with Russia are so bad that NATO can't even pay its people enough to go into the military. Now, people joke, manage the nuclear arsenal. Now, people joke about the Russians not providing their soldiers with proper equipment. But guys, NATO is depleted. I mean, even the United States stockpiles are getting low in fighting this conflict. And it's important to recognize that Russia is single-handedly, maybe with a little bit of help from the Iranians and the Chinese on the back channels, they're single-handedly holding off all of NATO. Like, this is literally everything NATO can bring to bear. Sure, the United States could probably send in a few more dozen HIMARS and a few other toys, but they need people to man those toys. So the reason why NATO is so terrified right now is because if the Russians are able to take over this region, which apparently has $14 trillion, yes, $trillion dollars in resources and industrial potential, they are going to be an economic powerhouse, and Poland and the Baltic states are going to be sitting ducks. This is why Finland, all the Baltic states and Poland are on high alert. They're building bunkers. They're preparing for nuclear Armageddon because they know if these riots and this inflation continues to get out of control and these wild energy prices, that NATO is going to dissolve and there's not going to be an Article 5 to come to their rescue. There's an interesting article that talks about all the spoils of war that Russia is hoping to get out of this region. more than 5,000 industrial, agricultural, processing, energy, and other enterprises, including steel production and steelworks, graphite, titanium, engineering, food production, of course. I believe there's like 2 million tons of food that can be potentially taken from this region every year. We have a chemical industry, pulp and paper, as well as electrical generation, as well as many other things on the Sea of Azov and access to the Baltic Sea, which they already had with Crimea. Of course, this would make it more secure and it would make Ukraine a rump state. So they would basically control most of the Baltic Sea. So it does not look good, my friends. I would encourage you to stay prepped, stay ready, and do not wait. This is the thing. When this situation gets out of control, when nuclear graces the headlines of mainstream medias around the world, it's going to be too late to order things from Amazon, because the rapidity of escalation beyond that point is going to be incredibly fast. So I would encourage people, take the risk. If there's things you need to get them now. Let's hope that cooler heads are going to prevail. Let's hope that the Russians, let's hope that whatever results in this Kherson situation, there's a stalemate afterwards and there's an armistice. But quite frankly, that is delusional thinking. That is absolutely not going to happen. If the Russians lose Kherson, something big is going to happen. Big things are going to happen either way. If they blow that one bridge, that hydroelectric bridge, there's a potential for that to cause massive flooding throughout that region. That may be why they pushed the button. It might be something to do with the fact that if they do get the water that's now pooled up because of that dam, that's used to cool the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactor. I obviously don't have a map to show you here, but there's a lot of moving parts here, guys, and the situation looks very untenable right now, and it looks like it's only going to escalate. And that is why you have defense ministers racing to have these secret meetings, because they understand the gravity of the situation. And it is not good that we are currently, till the end of the month, going to be seeing these nuclear exercises taking place, because there is a lot of room for potential error between Russia and the United States. So let me know what your thoughts are about the events of the day in the comment section below. And I would just encourage you guys, double, triple down on your preps. It's never going to be in vain. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.